I used to believe the most dangerous lies came from powerful men until a 6-year-old girl looked me straight in the eyes and whispered 7 words that saved my life. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors, turning every expensive suit and designer gown into something out of a magazine I could never afford. Soft piano music floated through the room, while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling glasses, and conversations blended into the comforting hum of people who had never worried about tomorrow. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress for what felt like the 100th time and squeezed my daughter Lily's tiny hand as we stepped farther inside. She was wearing the pale blue dress my mother had sewn before she passed away, and despite the elegance surrounding us, she looked perfectly at home, smiling politely at strangers who smiled back without knowing she had a habit of noticing things adults somehow missed. "Stay close, sweetheart," I whispered. She nodded, though her curious green eyes were already wandering across the enormous room. I had only agreed to attend because Mercy Children's Hospital had asked me to represent the pediatric department at the Foundation's annual charity gala. I was a pediatric nurse, not a socialite, and everything about this place reminded me that I belonged in hospital hallways instead of standing beneath million-dollar chandeliers pretending to understand conversations about investment portfolios and luxury real estate. The scent of fresh roses mixed with expensive perfume filled the air, while photographers captured smiling couples posing beneath the Foundation's golden crest. Then something changed. The conversations didn't stop, but they shifted, almost like an invisible current moving through the room. People stepped aside with practiced ease, making space without being asked. I followed their gaze. A tall man in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo walked through the entrance, surrounded by quiet security personnel who never looked rushed, yet somehow noticed everything. Damien Moretti. Even before someone whispered his name beside me, I recognized the face from newspaper articles and business magazines. 34 years old, billionaire investor, philanthropist. The public loved the charitable image. The private rumors painted something much darker. His expression never changed as he greeted donors with calm confidence. Yet there was something lonely about the way his gray eyes scanned every corner before settling on each handshake. Beside him walked Victoria Langford, his elegant fiancée, radiant beneath the lights, wearing a diamond engagement ring that caught every camera flash. They looked like the perfect couple, the kind magazines called untouchable. Lily suddenly stopped walking. Her small fingers tightened around mine, so firmly, it almost hurt. I looked down. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyes stayed fixed on Damien with an intensity no child should have carried. Before I could ask what was wrong, she slipped free from my hand and quietly crossed the polished floor. My heart nearly stopped. "Lily," I called softly, trying not to draw attention, but she was already standing in front of Damien. The room seemed to slow. Damien looked down, surprised more than annoyed, while several security guards exchanged cautious glances. Victoria smiled politely, expecting an innocent greeting. Instead, Lily stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. She looked directly into Damien's eyes and spoke so quietly that only those nearest could hear. "Someone is poisoning you." Every sound inside the ballroom disappeared from my ears except the pounding of my own heartbeat. Damien didn't laugh. He simply stared at my daughter as if, for the very first time in years, someone had said something he couldn't explain. Nobody moved for several long seconds. Damien Moretti remained perfectly still, his gray eyes locked on Lily as though he was trying to decide whether he was looking at an ordinary child or hearing something his instincts had been waiting for. Around us, polite smiles began returning to unfamiliar faces, and the quiet murmur of conversation slowly filled the ballroom again. Victoria let out a gentle laugh that sounded almost musical. "Children have such wonderful imaginations," she said warmly before, resting one elegant hand on Damien's arm. She probably overheard one of those mystery shows adults keep watching. Several guests chuckled politely. My face burned with embarrassment. I hurried forward, wrapped my hand around Lily's shoulder, and offered Damien an apologetic smile. "I am so sorry. She has never done anything like this before." Lily looked up at me, confused by my reaction rather than ashamed of her own. "Mom," she whispered. I was only telling him the truth. I gave her shoulder the slightest squeeze, silently asking her not to continue. Damien finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. What makes you think someone is poisoning me? His question surprised everyone nearby, including Victoria. There was no amusement in his expression, only quiet curiosity. Lily studied him with the same serious gaze she used whenever one of my young patients tried to pretend they were not hurting. Because you look sick, she answered simply. Not outside. Inside. Victoria smiled again, but this time the smile reached only her lips. That is enough, sweetheart. Mr. Moretti is perfectly healthy. Lily slowly shook her head. No, he is tired all the time. His hands get cold even when the room is warm. Sometimes his heart beats too fast, and sometimes it feels slow. He gets dizzy after dinner. My breath caught. Damien did not react immediately, but something changed behind his eyes. It was almost invisible, a tiny shift that most people would never notice. I noticed because years inside emergency rooms had taught me to recognize the exact instant someone stopped dismissing a possibility and started remembering symptoms. Victoria answered before Damien could. Damien works too much. Everyone knows that. She laughed softly toward the surrounding guests. He probably sleeps 4 hours a night. A businessman nearby nodded in agreement. That sounds exactly like Damien. The tension should have disappeared. Instead, it settled deeper into the room. Damien glanced toward the champagne flute a waiter had just offered him. He accepted it without taking a sip. His fingers remained wrapped around the crystal while he continued watching Lily. Have we met before? He asked. Lily shook her head. No. Has your mother ever worked for me? No. Then how could you possibly know those things? Lily frowned as if the answer were obvious. I do not know. I just know. I felt every pair of nearby eyes turning toward us. My instinct was to leave before this became tomorrow's gossip. Thank you for your kindness, I said quickly. We should let everyone enjoy the evening. I guided Lily toward the dining tables. She obeyed without resisting. But just before we reached our seats, she looked back over her shoulder. Damien was still standing exactly where we had left him. The untouched champagne remained in his hand. Across the ballroom, photographers called his name, asking him to smile for another picture beside Victoria. He did. It was flawless. Yet even from across the room, I could see his attention drifting toward us again and again. 15 minutes later, the charity auction began. Applause echoed beneath the chandeliers as donors pledged remarkable sums to support children's hospitals. I tried focusing on the speaker at the podium, but Lily quietly leaned closer. Mom, she whispered, he should not drink anything tonight. Before I could answer, scattered applause suddenly stopped. A crystal glass slipped from someone's hand near the front of the ballroom and shattered across the marble floor. Every head turned. Damien had caught himself against the edge of the table, breathing slowly as though a sudden wave of dizziness had passed through him. He straightened almost immediately and assured everyone that he was fine, but his eyes searched the room until they found Lily once again. The applause slowly returned, but it sounded different now, uncertain and scattered, like everyone was pretending they had not witnessed the brief moment that had interrupted the evening. Damien accepted a glass of water instead of champagne and assured the guests he simply needed a minute. The master of ceremonies smoothly continued the auction, determined to restore the glamorous atmosphere. Yet I noticed something almost no one else seemed to notice. Damien never reached for another drink. His attention remained divided between the stage and the table where Lily and I sat. I leaned closer to my daughter. Tell me exactly what made you say those things. Lily quietly folded her hands in her lap. His body feels tired, but he keeps making it work. Like when Mrs. Henderson at church looked happy, even though she had pneumonia. I stared at her in disbelief. She had been 6 years old when that happened. She had never forgotten the way illness changed a person's face long before obvious symptoms appeared. Did you see him take medicine? I asked carefully. She shook her head. No. But somebody wants him to keep getting sicker. Before I could ask another question, a man in a tailored charcoal suit approached our table. He looked to be in his early 40s with silver beginning to appear around his temples and the calm posture of someone who spent his life solving difficult problems. Miss Carter, he asked politely. I nodded. Mr. Moretti would appreciate a private conversation if you have a few moments. Every instinct told me to refuse. I had spent years teaching worried parents never to ignore their instincts. Yet something inside me said this conversation mattered. I looked down at Lily. Will you stay with Mrs. Reynolds from the hospital? Our department director smiled warmly and welcomed Lily beside her. My daughter nodded without protest, though her eyes quietly followed me as I crossed the ballroom. Damien was standing inside a smaller reception lounge just beyond the main hall. The room overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the distant lights reflected across the glass like scattered stars. He dismissed the security personnel with a simple glance, leaving only the gray-haired gentleman beside him. "This is Dr. Ethan Brooks," Damien said. "He has managed my annual physical examinations for nearly 8 years." Dr. Brooks offered his hand. "Your daughter made a remarkable observation tonight." I folded my arms, unsure where this conversation was heading. Children can notice surprising things. Damien looked directly at me. "She described symptoms that are not public knowledge." Dr. Brooks opened a leather portfolio and removed several laboratory reports. For the past 5 months, Mr. Moretti has experienced unexplained fatigue, occasional dizziness, irregular heart rhythm, nausea after evening meals, and intermittent numbness in his fingertips. Every examination has produced inconsistent results. Nothing definitive. I felt my pulse quicken. "Have you considered environmental exposure? Food sensitivities? Medication interactions?" The doctor gave a slow nod. "Every reasonable explanation has been investigated." Damien rested one hand against the polished wooden table. "No answers." I hesitated before speaking. "I cannot diagnose anyone from a conversation, and I certainly cannot explain how Lily noticed what she noticed. But if these symptoms have continued despite normal treatment, then something common to your daily routine deserves closer attention." Dr. Brooks became unusually quiet. His eyes drifted toward the unopened folder still resting beneath his hand. "There was one laboratory value from last week that bothered me," he admitted. "It suggested repeated exposure to a substance entering the body in extremely small amounts over an extended period. The result was so unusual that I believe the sample had been contaminated." Silence filled the room. Damien slowly turned toward the dark skyline beyond the windows. "And if the sample was accurate?" Dr. Brooks answered in a voice barely above a whisper. "Then someone close to you may have been intentionally making you ill for months." Damien closed his eyes for only a second before opening them again with remarkable composure. There was no panic, no anger, only a stillness that felt heavier than either. When he finally looked back at me, his expression had changed completely. The polite businessman standing in the ballroom was gone. In his place stood a man who had just realized trust could be the most dangerous luxury of all. Then he asked the one question I had been hoping he would never ask. "Miss Carter, do you believe your daughter can recognize the person responsible?" For a moment I could not answer. The question settled between us with a weight that made the elegant reception lounge feel much smaller than it had only minutes before. I looked through the glass wall toward the ballroom, where Lily sat quietly beside Mrs. Reynolds, swinging her legs beneath the chair as though this were any ordinary charity dinner instead of the beginning of something none of us understood. "She is a little girl," I said carefully. "She notices details. Sometimes she asks questions adults forget to ask. But I have never seen anything like tonight." Damien accepted my answer without disappointment. If anything, he seemed relieved that I refused to turn my daughter into something she was not. Dr. Brooks closed the medical folder. "Then we proceed with evidence, not assumptions." Damien nodded once. "Exactly." His voice regained the calm authority I imagined had built companies and commanded loyalty for years. "Nobody outside this room hears about these laboratory results." Dr. Brooks agreed immediately. "I will arrange a second independent analysis first thing tomorrow morning." Damien turned toward the gray-haired man who had escorted me into the room. "Marcus." "Yes, sir." "Review every meal delivered to my residence during the last 6 months. Every supplement. Every prescription. Every employee with direct access." Marcus did not ask why. He simply nodded once and quietly left the room. I realized then that this was how powerful people responded to uncertainty. There were no dramatic speeches, only decisions. Damien looked back at me. "Miss Carter, I owe your daughter more gratitude than I can express." "You do not owe us anything," I answered. "We could still be wrong." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I have ignored my own instincts for too long." Before either of us could continue, a gentle knock came at the door. Victoria stepped inside, carrying 2 porcelain coffee cups balanced on a silver tray. Her smile was effortless, warm enough to brighten the quiet room. There you are, she said softly. Everyone is asking where the guest of honor disappeared. She glanced toward me with perfect courtesy. I hope I am not interrupting. Damien's expression remained completely unchanged. Dr. Brooks was discussing a few routine health questions. Victoria's eyes briefly settled on the medical folder before returning to Damien. The movement lasted less than a second, but after everything I had just learned, I found myself noticing every tiny detail. You really should stop working so much, she said, placing one cup beside him. You skip meals, you sleep too little, and then you scare an entire ballroom by nearly fainting. Her concern sounded genuine. If I had not spoken with Dr. Brooks minutes earlier, I would have believed every word. Damien thanked her and wrapped his fingers around the coffee cup without lifting it. You always remember exactly how I take my coffee, he observed. Victoria smiled. Of course. 1 teaspoon of sugar. No cream. I have memorized every habit you have. Something about that sentence lingered in the silence after she spoke it. She excused herself to return to the ballroom, promising to save him a dance once the auction concluded. The door closed gently behind her. Neither Damien nor I spoke for several seconds. His eyes remained fixed on the untouched coffee. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket, removed a folded white handkerchief, and quietly placed it over the cup. Marcus will have this tested, he said. My heartbeat quickened. You think she? He raised one hand before I could finish. I think trust should never replace verification. His answer surprised me because there was no accusation in his voice, only discipline. He was refusing to let emotion decide what evidence had not yet proven. We returned to the ballroom together a few minutes later. The music had become livelier, and guests laughed as new auction winners posed for photographs. Everything looked perfectly normal. Yet I noticed security personnel discreetly changing positions around the room, speaking quietly into hidden earpieces while pretending to admire the decorations. Whatever investigation Damien had begun was already moving beneath the surface, invisible to everyone except those who knew where to look. As Lily saw me returning, she smiled with the simple relief only a child could show. Then her expression faded. She looked beyond me toward Victoria, who was greeting another table with effortless grace. Lily slowly reached for my hand and whispered so softly that only I could hear. Mom, she smiles with her mouth, but never with her eyes. The rest of the evening unfolded beneath sparkling chandeliers and polite applause, yet every smile suddenly seemed rehearsed to me. I had spent years reading worried parents across hospital rooms, recognizing fear hidden behind hopeful expressions, and now I found myself studying every face inside the ballroom the same way. Damien moved naturally from one conversation to another, thanking donors, congratulating auction winners, and posing for photographs exactly as everyone expected. If he was shaken by what Dr. Brooks had revealed, he refused to let the room see it. Victoria remained close beside him, graceful and attentive, occasionally adjusting his tie or lightly touching his arm with the effortless familiarity of someone preparing to become his wife. Anyone watching them would have described them as deeply devoted. I almost believed it myself until I remembered the untouched coffee hidden beneath a folded handkerchief. Shortly before the evening concluded, Damien approached our table once more. Miss Carter, he said quietly, would you allow me to arrange transportation home for you and Lily? I smiled politely. That is kind, but my car is only a few blocks away. He hesitated for the first time that night. I would feel better knowing you arrived safely. His words sounded courteous, but I sensed there was more behind them. Before I could answer, Marcus appeared beside him carrying a tablet. He leaned close enough that only Damien could hear. Damien's expression remained calm, yet I noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. He dismissed Marcus with a nod before looking back at me. Please, he repeated, humor me. I agreed, mostly because arguing felt unnecessary. 20 minutes later, Lily and I settled into the back seat of a quiet black sedan while the city lights reflected across rain-speckled windows. Another vehicle followed several car lengths behind us. Mom, Lily asked softly, why are 2 cars coming with us? I looked into the side mirror and realized she was right. Probably security, I answered, though I was no longer certain who they were protecting. We reached our small apartment building just after 10:30. The familiar brick entrance usually filled me with relief after long hospital shifts, but that night something felt different. Marcus stepped out first, and casually looked up and down the quiet street before opening our door. "Good evening, Miss Carter," he said. "If anything unusual happens tonight, call this number immediately." He handed me a simple white card containing only a phone number. No company logo, no name. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Mr. Moretti prefers caution." I thanked him and carried Lily upstairs. Our apartment was exactly as we had left it that morning. Children's drawings still covered the refrigerator, laundry waited in the basket beside the hallway, and the lavender candle I always lit after difficult shifts still rested on the kitchen counter. Everything ordinary suddenly felt precious. After Lily fell asleep, I stood beside her bedroom door watching her breathe peacefully beneath her favorite quilt. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter just after midnight. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. "Miss Carter," Damien's calm voice said after I answered. "I apologize for calling so late." My heart immediately began racing. "What happened?" There was a brief silence before he answered. "The laboratory completed a preliminary examination of the coffee." I gripped the edge of the counter without realizing it. And there was nothing unusual in the coffee. I quietly exhaled, embarrassed that part of me had expected a different answer. "Then perhaps this is all a misunderstanding." "Perhaps," Damien replied. "But something else happened tonight." His voice became even quieter. Marcus reviewed the security recordings from the ballroom. "During the 8 minutes before Victoria brought me that coffee, someone entered the private reception lounge while it was empty. They never touched the coffee service. They only opened my daily medication case, closed it again, and walked away." A chill ran through me despite the warm apartment. "Were they identified?" Another pause followed. "The cameras captured the person's hands." He stopped for a moment before finishing the sentence. "The engagement ring matched Victoria's exactly." Sleep never really came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victoria's effortless smile, Damien's untouched coffee cup, and the quiet certainty in Lily's voice. By sunrise, I had almost convinced myself that the investigation would move forward without us, that Damien's team would uncover the truth, while Lily and I returned to our ordinary lives at Mercy Children's Hospital. I could not have been more wrong. At 8:15 that morning, while I was checking a young patient's temperature, my phone vibrated inside my scrub pocket. During my lunch break, I finally listened to the voicemail. It was Damien. His voice sounded steady, but there was a new sharpness beneath the calm. "Miss Carter, Dr. Brooks received the second laboratory report. The original findings were correct. The substance has been entering my system repeatedly for several months in extremely small quantities. We now know it is not accidental." I stood frozen in the empty staff lounge, staring through the window at the hospital parking lot below. The words settled heavily inside me because they transformed suspicion into reality. Someone had not simply made a mistake. Someone had patiently planned for months. My shift ended at 4 o'clock, but as I walked toward the employee exit, I noticed the same black sedan parked across the street. Marcus stepped out before I reached the sidewalk. "Mr. Moretti asked me to drive you home." I sighed quietly. This is becoming unnecessary. Marcus opened the rear door with respectful patience. "With all due respect, Miss Carter, Mr. Moretti no longer believes that." During the drive, I learned why. Damien had quietly replaced every medication bottle in his home with identical containers filled by an independent pharmacy. Only 4 people knew about the change. 2 trusted physicians, Marcus and Damien himself. If anyone attempted to interfere again, they would reveal themselves without causing further harm. It was the kind of careful strategy that depended on patience instead of confrontation. When we arrived at my apartment building, Lily was waiting beside the window exactly where she always sat after school. She waved the moment she recognized the car. The instant Marcus parked, however, her smile disappeared. She looked beyond us toward the opposite side of the street. "Mom," she said softly after climbing into the back seat beside me. "That lady has been here before." I followed her gaze. A silver sedan pulled away from the curb at the same moment, disappearing into afternoon traffic before I could read the license plate. "Which lady?" I asked. Lily frowned as though searching for the right words. "The pretty one from the party." My stomach tightened. "Victoria?" Lily nodded once. "She looked at our building yesterday, too." Marcus remained perfectly still for several seconds before quietly speaking into a small earpiece. He never raised his voice or showed alarm, but I noticed another black vehicle appear at the end of the block less than a minute later. That evening, Damien invited us to his estate, insisting that Dr. Brooks wanted to ask Lily a few harmless questions about what she had observed. The mansion was impressive without feeling extravagant, filled with warm lighting, bookshelves, family photographs, and fresh flowers instead of cold luxury. It surprised me because I had expected something intimidating. Instead, it felt like the home of a man who had been trying very hard to build a peaceful life. While Dr. Brooks spoke with Lily in the library, I wandered into a hallway lined with framed photographs. Most showed Damien at charity events or business conferences, but one picture caught my attention. It had been taken nearly a year earlier at another fundraising gala. Damien stood beside Victoria, smiling for the cameras. Resting on the table beside them was a familiar amber prescription bottle. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer. Victoria's hand was reaching toward it just as the photograph had been captured. It could have been completely innocent. It probably was. Yet after everything I had learned, I could no longer ignore small details. Footsteps approached behind me. I turned to find Damien watching the same photograph with an expression that revealed he had noticed the exact same thing. The photograph stayed between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer too quickly. Damien carefully removed the frame from the wall and studied it beneath the warm hallway lights. "This was taken 11 months ago," he said quietly. "I never noticed where her hand was." I looked again. The image proved nothing by itself. A single frozen moment could never tell an entire story. "One photograph is not evidence," I said. Damien nodded. "No, but patterns become evidence." He returned the frame to its place with the same precision he seemed to bring to every decision. "Marcus has already started building a timeline." We walked toward the library where Lily was finishing her conversation with Dr. Brooks. My daughter sat comfortably in an oversized leather chair with a coloring book spread across her lap. Instead of drawing flowers or animals, she had filled the page with a long dining table, several small circles that represented plates, and one glass shaded bright blue while every other glass remained clear. Dr. Brooks looked at me with gentle curiosity. I did not ask her to draw this. She simply wanted to. Lily looked up. "That is the one he should never drink." Damien remained silent for several seconds before kneeling beside her. "Can you tell me why that one is different?" Lily shrugged softly. "I do not know why. I just know it feels wrong." Dr. Brooks closed the coloring book without saying another word. As we left the library, Damien spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "My engagement celebration is this Saturday night." I looked at him, immediately understanding what he was thinking. You believe something may happen there. If someone has spent months depending on routine, changing that routine may force another move. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a determination that had not been there only days earlier. Marcus and Dr. Brooks think the safest approach is to let everyone believe nothing has changed. I stopped walking. You are planning to attend your own engagement celebration as though everything is normal. Yes. Even after everything. You know, especially because of what I know. I wanted to argue, but I realized he was not acting recklessly. Every medication had already been replaced. Every drink would be monitored. Every member of the household had quietly been reassigned without explanation. He was not walking into danger blindly. He was inviting the truth to reveal itself. 2 days passed with surprising calm. I returned to the hospital, Lily returned to school, and Damien continued appearing in public beside Victoria exactly as before. Newspaper websites praised the couple's upcoming celebration, calling them one of the city's most admired pairs. Looking at those smiling photographs, no one could have imagined the silent investigation unfolding behind the scenes. On Friday afternoon, Marcus arrived unexpectedly outside the pediatric wing. His normally composed face revealed the first hint of concern I had ever seen. "Miss Carter, Mr. Moretti would like you and Lily to attend tomorrow evening's celebration." I stared at him in disbelief. "That is impossible. Officially, you are being recognized for your volunteer work with Mercy Children's Hospital." He handed me 2 elegant invitations embossed with gold lettering. "Unofficially, Mr. Moretti believes your presence may help him notice details that others overlook." I hesitated. "And Lily?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Mr. Moretti specifically asked that she come." The following evening, the estate looked even more magnificent than it had before, illuminated by thousands of soft white lights stretching across the gardens like stars brought down to earth. A string quartet played beneath a glass pavilion while guests arrived in formal attire, laughing beneath the warm summer sky. Victoria welcomed every visitor with effortless grace, her diamond rings sparkling beneath the lights. She embraced Damien with perfect affection whenever photographers approached, creating the flawless image everyone expected to see. Lily quietly held my hand as we entered the reception area. She did not smile. Her eyes slowly traveled across the beautifully arranged tables until they stopped at the center of the garden where crystal glasses had already been placed beside every seat. She gently tightened her grip on my fingers and whispered so softly that only I could hear, "Mom, the blue glass is waiting for him again." Music drifted across the garden while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying polished silver trays. And if I had not known what lay beneath the surface, I would have believed I was watching nothing more than another elegant celebration. Damien stood beneath strings of warm lights greeting business partners, community leaders, and hospital donors with the same calm confidence he had shown since the night we first met. Victoria remained beside him, radiant in an ivory evening gown, thanking guests for sharing what everyone believed would become one of the happiest moments of their lives. Only a handful of people knew the evening was unfolding according to a very different plan. Marcus quietly directed staff through nearly invisible earpieces while Dr. Brooks blended naturally among the guests, carrying himself like any other family friend. Every beverage prepared for Damien had already been documented. Every medication remained under secure supervision. Every camera on the estate had been reviewed twice that afternoon. Damien had transformed his own engagement celebration into the safest place possible to uncover the truth. Lily never let go of my hand. Her eyes moved slowly across the tables until they settled on the crystal glass placed beside Damien's dinner plate. "That one," she whispered. "It is waiting for him." I looked carefully. Nothing appeared unusual. The glass matched every other glass on the table, sparkling beneath the lights. Marcus noticed where Lily was looking and gave the slightest nod before quietly walking toward the dining area. He never touched the glass. He simply positioned himself nearby as another member of the staff continued serving the guests. Dinner began with laughter and warm conversation. Damien thanked everyone for supporting the Children's Foundation, speaking with sincere appreciation that drew generous applause. Then Victoria rose to offer a heartfelt toast. She spoke about trust, partnership, and building a future together, her voice filled with emotion that sounded completely genuine. Even I felt myself wondering whether we had misunderstood everything. As the applause faded, she lifted a crystal pitcher from the center of the table. "Allow me," she said with a warm smile. "I know exactly how Damien prefers his sparkling water." She reached for his glass with practiced confidence. Before the water touched the rim, Damien gently covered the top of the glass with his hand. "Actually," he said pleasantly, "I think I will pour it myself tonight." For the first time all evening, Victoria hesitated. It lasted barely a heartbeat before her smile returned. "Of course." She handed him the pitcher without complaint. Damien accepted it, but did not pour. Instead, he looked toward Marcus. "Would you bring me the presentation folder from my study?" Marcus understood immediately. Within moments, he returned carrying a slim leather portfolio. Damien placed it on the table beside his untouched glass. "Before we continue our celebration," he said calmly, addressing the guests, "there is something important I need to clarify." The music quietly stopped. Conversations disappeared. Damien opened the portfolio and removed several documents along with enlarged still photographs from the estate's security cameras. For several months, he continued with remarkable composure. "My physicians have investigated an unexplained decline in my health." A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Victoria looked at him with convincing concern. "Damien, this is not the time." He met her eyes gently. "I believe it is exactly the right time." He placed one photograph on the table. It showed the private reception lounge from the charity gala. Another showed the medication case. A third captured a hand opening it while no one else was present. The engagement ring was unmistakable. No accusation came from Damien's voice, only quiet facts. Dr. Brooks stepped forward and calmly explained the laboratory findings confirming repeated exposure over many months. Marcus then presented access records showing who had routinely handled Damien's medication during that same period. No one raised their voice. No one created a scene. The truth unfolded through patience instead of anger. Victoria stared silently at the photographs before lowering her eyes. The confident smile she had worn for months slowly disappeared, not because someone had forced it away, but because the weight of undeniable evidence left no place for it to hide. Across the silent garden, Lily squeezed my hand and looked up at me with quiet relief. "He is finally safe," she whispered. The garden remained completely silent long after the documents had been placed back inside the leather portfolio. Nobody rushed to speak because the truth had already said everything that needed to be said. Damien stood with the same quiet dignity he had carried throughout the evening. But for the first time since I had met him, the invisible weight resting on his shoulders seemed lighter. Victoria slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the white tablecloth beside the untouched crystal glass. She did not argue with the evidence or attempt to explain it away. She simply lowered her eyes, whispered that she was sorry for the choices she had made, and allowed Marcus to escort her away with calm professionalism and respect. The guests watched in stunned silence, not because they had witnessed a dramatic confrontation, but because they had seen something far more powerful. They had watched the truth overcome appearances. Within minutes, the musicians quietly packed away their instruments. Conversations faded into respectful whispers, and the celebration came to a natural close. There was no grand announcement, no spectacle, only people leaving the estate carrying a lesson they would never forget. I found Lily sitting beside the garden fountain with her feet barely reaching the stone edge. She smiled when she saw me, looking far more interested in the tiny lights dancing across the water than in everything that had just happened. Children had an extraordinary way of returning to peace once they knew the people they loved were safe. Damien approached us without security surrounding him for the first time since that unforgettable charity gala. He looked tired, but it was a different kind of tiredness, the exhaustion that follows finally putting down a burden carried for far too long. He knelt until he was at Lily's eye level. "I have been trying to think of the right words," he said gently. "Thank you does not seem nearly enough." Lily tilted her head. "You do not have to thank me." "Why not?" She smiled with complete innocence. "Because helping people is what Mom says we are supposed to do." I saw Damien's expression soften in a way I had never imagined possible. The powerful businessman disappeared, replaced by a man quietly learning a lesson from a child. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed the white business card Marcus had given me outside my apartment days earlier. He looked at it for a moment before folding it in half and placing it back into his pocket. "I offered protection because I thought danger was the greatest gift I could remove from your lives," he said, looking at me. "Now I realize something different protected me first. Kindness." I did not know how to answer. Everything about our worlds had been different only a week earlier. Mine had been filled with hospital shifts, school lunches, and bedtime stories. His had been boardrooms, security teams, and impossible responsibilities. Somehow those two lives had crossed because one little girl refused to stay silent. Several weeks later, Dr. Brooks confirmed that Damien's health had already begun improving. Without the repeated exposure, his energy slowly returned, his heartbeat stabilized, and the constant exhaustion that had followed him for months gradually disappeared. Life also returned to something that resembled normal for Lily and me. I continued working at Mercy Children's Hospital, where children still believed stickers could solve almost anything, and courage often came in the smallest voices. Damien quietly expanded the Children's Foundation, funding new equipment, scholarships, and family support programs without placing his own name on every building. Sometimes he visited the hospital carrying boxes of books instead of photographers. Sometimes he sat in the waiting room reading stories to nervous children while their parents met with doctors. He never acted like someone trying to repay a debt. He simply chose to become the kind of person he wished he had met sooner. On the first anniversary of the charity gala, Lily slipped her small hand into mine as we watched the sunset outside the hospital. She looked toward Damien, who was laughing with a group of young patients while helping them plant flowers in a new healing garden. "Mom," she whispered with the same quiet certainty that had changed everything. "He does not look sick anymore." I smiled as the evening light settled across the garden, realizing that sometimes the strongest people in the world are not the ones who command rooms with power, but the ones who listen when truth arrives in the smallest voice imaginable.